Chapter 1. The Invitation to Blackthorn Manor. Hercule Poirot adjusted his impeccable moustache, his gloved fingers brushing the waxed tips with the precision of a maestro tuning an instrument. The morning light filtered through the curtains of his London apartment, casting a soft glow on the letter he held. It was an unusual missive, written in an elegant hand on cream-coloured paper, its edges faintly embossed with a crest he did not recognise. The sender, anonymous, invited him to Blackthorn Manor, a remote estate nestled in the heart of the Whispering Woods, some 50 miles from the city. The letter spoke of a gathering of notable persons and hinted at a matter requiring Poirot's unique talents. Most intriguing was the closing line. "A shadow looms over Blackthorn, Monsieur Poirot. Only you may dispel it before it consumes us all." Poirot's green eyes narrowed. "Mon Dieu," he murmured, "a challenge wrapped in mystery. This is not to be ignored." He summoned his valet, George, and within the hour his bags were packed for the journey. The train to the village of Thornwick was prompt, and as the countryside blurred past, Poirot's mind churned. Who had summoned him? And why the cryptic warning? His little grey cells were already at work, piecing together the puzzle before the first clue was fully revealed. The station at Thornwick was a quaint affair, little more than a platform hemmed by wildflowers. A carriage awaited, its driver, a taciturn man with a weathered face who introduced himself as Mr. Hobb. "Blackthorn Manor's a ways off, sir," he said, his voice low, through the whispering woods. "Mind you keep the windows shut." Poirot raised an eyebrow, but complied, settling into the carriage as it rattled along a winding road. The woods loomed ahead, a dense tangle of ancient oaks and yews, their branches interlocking like skeletal fingers. A faint mist clung to the ground, and the air carried a peculiar hum, as though the trees themselves whispered secrets. "These woods," Poirot ventured, "they have a name, yes? Why whispering?" Hobb's shoulders stiffened. "Folks say the trees talk, sir. Old tales, mind you, ghosts of them what vanished here long ago. Best not to listen." Poirot smiled faintly. Superstition, perhaps, but he noted the driver's unease. The journey deepened into the forest, the light dimming as the canopy thickened. The whispers grew louder, a soft susurrus that seemed to ebb and flow with the wind. Poirot, ever the rationalist, attributed it to the breeze, yet even he felt a prickle at the nape of his neck. At last the carriage emerged into a clearing, and Blackthorn Manor came into view. It was a grand Gothic structure of grey stone, its turrets piercing the sky like the spires of some forgotten cathedral. Ivy clung to its walls, and the windows gleamed with an almost watchful intensity. Poirot disembarked, his patent leather, shoes crunching on the gravel drive. A butler, tall and gaunt, greeted him at the entrance. "Monsieur Poirot, I presume. I am Grayson. The master awaits." Poirot nodded, his eyes scanning the manor's facade. Already he sensed an undercurrent of tension, as though the house itself held its breath. The interior was as opulent as it was foreboding. A chandelier glittered in the foyer, its light casting shadows that danced across portraits of stern-faced ancestors. Grayson led Poirot to a drawing-room where the other guests were assembled. Lord Reginald Ashby, the manor's owner, rose to greet him. A man in his 50s, Ashby had the bearing of old money, though his eyes betrayed a flicker of unease. "Monsieur Poirot, your reputation precedes you," he said, shaking Poirot's hand. "We are honoured." His tone was courteous, yet Poirot detected a hint of reluctance, as though Ashby had not been the one to extend the invitation. The room held a curious assortment. Lady Eleanor Ashby, Lord Reginald's sister, whose cool demeanour suggested hidden depths, Dr. Mortimer Crane, a physician with a nervous habit of adjusting his spectacles, Miss Clara Beaumont, a young heiress with a sharp wit, Mr. Victor Langley, a businessman whose joviality seemed forced, and Mrs. Lavinia Holt, a widow with a penchant for dramatic gestures. Poirot's gaze darted from one to another, cataloguing their mannerisms. "A most eclectic gathering," he remarked to himself, "but what unites them?" Tea was served and conversation flowed, though it was punctuated by awkward silences. The guests spoke of trivialities, London's theatre season, the weather, but Poirot sensed they were avoiding something. He inquired about the Whispering Woods, prompting a tense exchange. "Nonsense, all of it," Ashby declared, dismissing the legends. Lady Eleanor, however, leaned forward. "The locals believe the woods are cursed," she said softly. "They say those who linger too long hear voices and never return." Her words hung in the air, and Dr. Crane shifted uncomfortably. Evening approached. Grayson announced dinner would be served shortly. Poirot excused himself to freshen up, but as he reached his room, he found an envelope slipped beneath the door. Inside was a single sheet of paper, the same cream-coloured stock as the invitation. In bold, slanted script, it read, "Death walks among us tonight. Trust no one." Poirot's pulse quickened, though his expression remained impassive. He folded the note and tucked it into his waistcoat pocket. "Eh bien," he whispered, "the game begins." Returning to the drawing-room, he observed the guests with renewed scrutiny. Someone in this room, or perhaps beyond it, knew more than they let on. The whispers of the woods seemed to echo in his mind, a chorus of secrets waiting to be unravelled. As the dinner gong sounded, Poirot straightened his tie and prepared to dine, not only on the Manor's fine cuisine, but on the clues that Blackthorn Manor was about to serve. Chapter 2. Shadows in the Candlelight. The dining hall of Blackthorn Manor gleamed with the opulence of a bygone era. A long mahogany table, polished to a mirror-like sheen, stretched beneath a chandelier, dripping with crystals that scattered light across the room. Hercule Poirot, seated near the head of the table, surveyed the scene with the precision of a watchmaker. The flickering candlelight cast long shadows, and the faces of the guests seemed to shift in the interplay of light and dark, as though each hid a secret behind their polite smiles. The note in Poirot's waistcoat pocket, "Death walks among us tonight. Trust no one," weighed heavily on his mind, though his expression remained serene. Lord Reginald Ashby presided at the table's head, his voice booming as he welcomed the guests. "To new friendships and old," he toasted, raising a glass of claret. The clink of crystal echoed, but Poirot noted the forced cheer. Lady Eleanor Ashby, seated opposite her brother, barely touched her wine, her gaze fixed on some distant point. Dr. Mortimer Crane, to Poirot's left, fumbled with his napkin, his fingers trembling slightly. Miss Clara Beaumont, the young heiress, laughed too loudly at a jest from Mr. Victor Langley, the businessman, whose eyes darted nervously toward the windows. Mrs. Lavinia Holt, swathed in black lace, leaned forward to murmur something to Ashby, her voice low and urgent. The first course, a delicate consommé, was served by Grayson, the butler, whose movements were as silent as a spectre's. Poirot sipped his soup, his senses attuned to the undercurrents in the room. "A splendid manner, Lord Ashby," he remarked, his Belgian accent crisp. "But tell me, is it often so lively with guests?" Ashby's smile tightened. "Rarely, Monsieur Poirot. This gathering is something of a special occasion." He offered no further explanation, and Poirot filed the evasion away for later. Scrutiny conversation turned to the Whispering Woods, prompted by Clara's innocent query. "Is it true the trees speak?" she asked, her eyes wide with curiosity. A hush fell over the table. Lady Eleanor's spoon paused mid-air. "A foolish superstition," she said sharply. "The wind plays tricks, nothing more." Dr. Crane cleared his throat. "I've heard patients in Thornwick speak of odd experiences. Sounds like voices, they say." His voice faltered under Eleanor's glare. Mrs. Holt, ever theatrical, leaned in. "My late husband believed in such things. He'd say the woods have a memory, and they never forget a wrong." Her words hung in the air, and Poirot's gaze flicked to Ashby, who shifted uncomfortably. The windows rattled suddenly, a gust from the woods pressing against the glass. The candles flickered, and for a moment the room seemed to dim. Poirot's ears caught a faint sound, a low, murmuring hum, like the whispers Hob had described. He glanced at the guests, noting their reactions. Clara shivered. Langley gripped his glass tightly, and Crane's spectacles glinted as he stared at the window. Only Eleanor remained composed, though her knuckles whitened around her fork. "The storm is coming," Ashby said, breaking the silence. "Nothing to fret about." Poirot steered the conversation to the guests' backgrounds, probing gently. Langley boasted of his shipping ventures, though his bravado seemed rehearsed. Clara spoke of her recent inheritance, her tone light, but her eyes wary. Crane mentioned his practice in London, but his vague answers about his presence at Blackthorn piqued Poirot's interest. Mrs. Holt regaled the table with tales of her travels, yet Poirot sensed she was deflecting. Eleanor and Ashby were the most guarded, their responses polite but clipped. Each guest, Poirot mused, was a piece in a puzzle whose shape he had yet to discern. The main course, roast pheasant with truffle sauce, arrived, and the mood lightened momentarily. Poirot, ever observant, noted the seating arrangement. Why had Ashby placed Langley beside Clara? And why did Eleanor watch Crane so closely? She dictated as little grey cells churned, cataloguing every glance, every pause. He recalled the anonymous invitation that had brought him here. Was the sender among these guests, or was an unseen hand orchestrating this gathering? As dessert was served, a rich chocolate torte, Grayson leaned down to murmur something to Ashby, who nodded curtly. Poirot caught the exchange, his curiosity sharpening. He was about to inquire when a sharp noise interrupted the meal. A low, eerie wail from outside, rising and falling like a mourner's cry. The guests froze. "Just the wind," Ashby said, but his voice lacked conviction. Clara clutched Langley's arm, and Crane's face paled. Poirot's eyes narrowed. The sound was too deliberate, too human. Before anyone could speak, a piercing scream shattered the air, coming from the direction of the manor's east wing. The guests leapt to their feet, chairs scraping against the floor. "Good heavens!" Mrs. Holt gasped, her hand at her throat, Ashby's face drained of colour. "Grayson, see to it at once!" he barked. The butler hurried out and Poirot rose, his calm demeanour unshaken. "Mes amis," he said, his voice steady, "we must remain composed. I shall accompany Grayson." Ignoring Ashby's protest, Poirot followed the butler down a dimly lit corridor, the scream's echo still ringing in his ears. The air grew colder as they approached the east wing, where a heavy oak door stood ajar. Grayson hesitated, but Poirot pushed past, his cane tapping the floor. Inside, a small parlour lay in disarray, papers scattered, a chair overturned. At the centre of the room, a window gaped open, its curtains billowing in the night air. "Ficou," whispers of the woods seemed louder here, almost mocking. Poirot's gaze swept the scene, landing on a single object. A silver hairpin, glinting on the floor near the window. He bent to examine it, his mind racing. "Mon Dieu," he murmured, "the plot thickens." The scream, the disarray, the hairpin, each was a clue, a thread in the tapestry of Blackthorn Manor's mystery. As Grayson called for the other servants, Poirot straightened, his green eyes gleaming with resolve. Someone in this house was playing a dangerous game, and Hercule Poirot intended to uncover their every move. Chapter 3. The Body in the Grove. The scream from the east wing still echoed in Hercule Poirot's mind as he stood in the disarrayed parlour, the silver hairpin glinting in his gloved hand. The open window admitted a chill breeze, carrying the faint, unsettling whispers of the woods beyond. Before he could ponder further, Grayson, the butler, returned, his face ashen. "Monsieur Poirot," he stammered, "you must come at once. It's Miss Beaumont." Poirot's heart quickened, though his expression remained composed. "Allons-y," he said, tucking the hairpin into his pocket and following Grayson into the night. The air outside Blackthorn Manor was thick with mist, the whispering woods a shadowy labyrinth under a sickle moon. Grayson led Poirot and a small group, Lord Ashby, Dr. Crane, and a trembling footman named Thomas, toward a grove deep within the forest. The whispers grew louder, a sibilant chorus that seemed to mock their hurried steps. Poirot's cane sank slightly into the damp earth, but his focus was unwavering. The scream, the hairpin, the anonymous note, all pointed to a tragedy he had been summoned to unravel. They reached a clearing where ancient oaks formed a natural cathedral, their branches clawing at the sky. There, bathed in moonlight, lay Clara, Beaumont, her body arranged with unsettling precision. Her arms were crossed over her chest, her eyes wide open, staring blankly upward. A thin trickle of blood ran from a wound at her temple, and her pale dress was smeared with earth. Most striking was a symbol carved into the bark of a nearby oak, a crude spiral bisected by a line, glistening as though freshly cut. "Mon Dieu," Poirot murmured, kneeling beside the body. His gloved fingers hovered over the wound, noting its clean edge. This was no accident. Dr. Crane, visibly shaken, stepped forward. She's gone, isn't she?" he whispered, adjusting his spectacles. Poirot nodded gravely. Oui, monsieur. Death came swiftly, but with intent. Ashby, his face taut, demanded, Who could do this? In my own woods. Poirot's eyes flicked to him, detecting a tremor beneath his outrage. The local constable, a stout man named Hargreaves, arrived, summoned by a servant. He surveyed the scene with a mix of awe and unease. Never seen anything like it, he muttered. Looks like some ritual. Poirot, ignoring the speculation, examined the ground. The earth was soft, but the only footprints were Clara's own, leading from the manor to the grove. Curious, he said softly. The killer left no trace. He turned to the carved symbol, tracing its lines with a finger. This mark. It is deliberate. A message, perhaps. Poirot questioned. The group, Thomas, the footman, admitted he'd last seen Clara slip out after dinner, claiming she needed air. She seemed nervous, sir, he said, kept looking over her shoulder. Ashby confirmed Clara had been restless during the meal, though he claimed ignorance of her reasons. Dr. Crane, sweating despite the chill, said he'd retired early and saw nothing. Poirot noted their responses, his little grey cells cataloguing inconsistencies. Why had Clara ventured into the woods alone? And where was her silver hairpin, last seen in the parlour? He searched Clara's body with care, noting a missing brooch she'd worn at dinner, a sapphire piece shaped like a crescent moon. Interessant, he mused. The brooch's absence suggested theft or a deliberate removal. He also found a crumpled note in her clenched fist, its ink smudged but legible. Meet me at the Grove, midnight. Tell no one. The handwriting matched neither the invitation nor the warning note Poirot had received, adding another layer to the mystery. The whispers of the woods seemed to intensify, curling around the group like a living thing. Hargreaves shivered. This place ain't right, he said. Poirot, undeterred, directed the constable to secure the scene and send for a coroner. He turned to Ashby. Lord Ashby, who among your guests knew Miss Beaumont well? Ashby hesitated. She was acquainted with Langley, I believe. A business matter, perhaps. His vagueness piqued Poirot's interest. And the symbol? Poirot pressed, pointing to the tree. Ashby paled. I've never seen it before. As the group prepared to return to the manor, Poirot lingered, his eyes scanning the grove. The moonlight revealed faint scratches on the ground near Clara's body. Too faint to be footprints, but suggestive of something dragged. Qu'est-ce que c'est? He murmured. He followed the marks a few paces, finding a snapped twig and a shred of dark fabric caught on a thorn. He pocketed the fabric, his mind racing. The killer had been careful, but not infallible. Back at the manor, the remaining guests were gathered in the drawing room, their faces a tableau of shock and fear. Mrs. Holt dabbed at her eyes with a handkerchief, murmuring about curses. Lady Eleanor stood by the fireplace, her expression unreadable. Langley paced, muttering about leaving at first light. Poirot observed them all, noting how grief mingled with suspicion. Mes amis, he said, his voice cutting through the tension. A terrible crime has been committed. I, Hercule Poirot, will find the truth. But I must ask for your cooperation. He requested alibis for the time of the murder, estimated by Dr. Crane at around midnight. Most claimed to have been in their rooms, but Langley admitted to a late walk in the garden, and Mrs. Holt said she'd been in the library unable to sleep. Eleanor's alibi was vague. She'd been attending to correspondence. Poirot's smile was polite, but sharp. "Très bien," he said. "We shall speak more tomorrow." As the guests dispersed, Poirot stood by a window, gazing at the whispering woods. The whispers seemed to call to him, a challenge from the shadows. Clara's death was no random act. It was the opening move in a deadly game. With the hairpin, the note, the symbol, and the missing brooch, Poirot had his first clues. "The truth lies in the details," he whispered, his green eyes gleaming. The whispering woods held their secrets tightly, but Hercule Poirot was determined to make them speak. Chapter 4. Whispers of the Past. The morning after Clara Beaumont's murder dawned grey and heavy, the mist clinging to the whispering woods like a shroud. Hercule Poirot stood at the window of Blackthorn Manor's library, his gloved hands clasped behind his back, his green eyes fixed on the shadowed trees. The whispers, ever present, seemed to pulse with a rhythm that matched his thoughts. The silver hairpin, the crumpled note, the carved symbol, and the missing sapphire brooch. These were the threads of a tapestry he was determined to unravel. "The past holds the key," he murmured, turning toward the shelves of dusty tomes that lined the room. And in this manner, the past is never silent. Poirot had risen early, leaving the other guests to their fitful sleep. The library, with its high ceilings and musty air, was a treasure trove of history. He sought answers about Blackthorn Manor and the Whispering Woods, suspecting the murder was rooted in something older than the present gathering. Grayson, the butler, had mentioned a tragedy from decades past, and Poirot's little grey cells demanded details. He began with the estate's records, pulling down leather-bound volumes that chronicled the Ashby family's lineage. The first clue came from a ledger dated 1895, its pages brittle but legible. It described a young woman, Margaret Ashby, who had vanished in the Whispering Woods at the age of 22. She was Lord Reginald's aunt, the sister of his father, and her disappearance had scandalized the family. The ledger noted whispers of a forbidden romance and a betrayal that led to her flight into the woods, never to return. Poirot's brow furrowed. "Une tragédie ancienne," he said softly. "But how does it connect to Mademoiselle Beaumont?" He questioned the manor's staff, starting with Mrs. Finch, the housekeeper, whose lined face betrayed a lifetime of loyalty to the Ashbys. She was reluctant, her hands twisting in her apron as she spoke. "Miss Margaret was a kind soul, sir," she said. "Loved a man she shouldn't have. A groundskeeper, they said. Her father, old Lord Ashby, forbade it. Then she was gone, and the woods, they've whispered ever since." Poirot pressed for more, but Mrs. Finch grew tight-lipped, muttering about curses and crossing herself. Next, he spoke to Thomas, the footman, who was more forthcoming. "There's talk in Thornwick, sir," he said, glancing nervously at the library door. "They say Margaret's lover was blamed for her disappearance, though no body was found. He was driven out, but some think he never left the woods." Poirot's eyes gleamed. A scorned lover, a vanished girl, motives for vengeance, could linger across generations. He noted Thomas's mention of a locket Margaret wore, a detail that echoed the missing brooch from Clara's body. Poirot returned to the library, his cane tapping rhythmically as he paced. A glint of light caught his eye, a small locked drawer in a mahogany desk. With a hairpin from his pocket, not Clara's, but one of his own, he deftly picked the lock, revealing a bundle of letters tied with faded ribbon. They were love letters, penned by Margaret to a man named Elias Crow, the groundskeeper. The final letter, dated the night of her disappearance, spoke of a secret meeting in the woods and her fear of her father's wrath. "Mon Dieu, Poirot," whispered, "a rendezvous that ended in tragedy." Tucked among the letters was a journal, its pages filled with Margaret's elegant script. It detailed her love for Elias and her suspicion that her brother, Reginald's father, had uncovered their plans to elope. The final entry read, "The woods call to me tonight. I hear them whisper my name. Elias will meet me at the grove, but I fear we are watched." Poirot's pulse quickened. The grove, the same place Clara had been found. Was her murder a twisted echo of Margaret's fate? He ventured into the whispering woods, drawn to the grove where Clara's body had been discovered. The air was damp, the whispers louder now, curling around him like a living presence. He stood by the oak with the carved spiral, its lines stark against the bark. Kneeling, he examined the ground, finding faint scratches near the tree's roots. With a small trowel from his pocket, Poirot was always prepared. He dug carefully, uncovering a rusted locket half buried in the earth. Inside was a faded photograph of a young woman, Margaret, he presumed, and a lock of dark hair. "C'est magnifique," he said, pocketing the locket. It was no coincidence that Clara's brooch was missing. The killer was leaving a trail. Returning to the manor, Poirot sought out Lady Eleanor, whose guarded demeanour intrigued him. He found her in the conservatory, tending to a wilting orchid. "Lady Eleanor," he began, his tone polite but probing, "you know of Margaret Ashby, yes?" Her hand froze, and her eyes met his, sharp and wary. "A sad story," she said, curtly. "She was reckless. The woods took her." Poirot smiled faintly. "Perhaps, but the woods do not carve symbols, nor do they strike young women at midnight." Eleanor's lips tightened, but she said no more. As evening fell, Poirot reflected in his room, the locket and letters spread before him. The whispering woods held a grudge, it seemed, one tied to Margaret's disappearance, and now mirrored in Clara's death, the carved symbol, the missing brooch, the note in Clara's hand, all pointed to a killer with a purpose. Was it vengeance for Margaret, or something deeper, woven into the Ashby family's secrets? The whispers outside his window grew insistent, as though urging him to dig further. Poirot straightened his tie, his resolve firm. "The past speaks," he said to the empty room, "and Hercule Poirot listens." Tomorrow he would confront the guests again, probing their connections to the manor and its history. The killer was close, watching, perhaps even whispering in the woods. With the locket as his latest clue, Poirot was one step nearer to unmasking them. But the shadows of Blackthorn Manor were long, and the truth remained just out of reach. Chapter 5. The Locked Room Riddle. The dawn following Clara Beaumont's murder cast a pall over Blackthorn Manor, the whispering woods shrouded in a fog that seemed to seep into the very walls. Hercule Poirot, impeccably dressed despite the early hour, stood in the library, the rusted locket from Margaret Ashby's time resting on the desk beside Margaret's journal. The connection between Clara's death and the long-ago disappearance gnawed at his little grey cells. The carved spiral, the missing brooch, the cryptic note, all pointed to a killer with a purpose rooted in the Manor's past. But before Poirot could pursue this thread, a commotion erupted from the upper floors, shattering the morning's uneasy quiet. Grayson, the butler, burst into the library, his usual composure frayed. "Monsieur Poirot, come quickly. It's Dr. Crane. He's been found dead." Poirot's eyes narrowed, and he followed Grayson up the grand staircase, his cane tapping a steady rhythm. The guests were gathered in the hallway, their faces a mix of shock and dread. Lord Ashby, pale and dishevelled, stood before a locked door to a guest room. "It's impossible," he muttered. "The door was bolted from within." Poirot's interest sharpened. "Impossible, mon ami," he said softly. "For Hercule Poirot, there is no such word. The door, heavy oak with an iron bolt, yielded only after Thomas the footman forced it open with a crowbar. Inside, Dr. Mortimer Crane lay sprawled across the bed, his spectacles askew, a thin line of blood at his throat. A dagger, its handle ornate and unfamiliar, protruded from the wound. The room was small, its single window locked tight, the curtains undisturbed. The bolt on the door, now splintered, had been firmly in place. Poirot's gaze swept the scene, cataloguing every detail. The untouched glass of water on the bedside, table, the faint smell of lavender, and a single candle burned low, casting eerie shadows. "Mon Dieu," Poirot murmured, kneeling beside the body. The wound was precise, suggesting a swift, practised hand. He examined the dagger, noting its antique design, perhaps an heirloom from the manor itself. The window, he confirmed, was sealed, its latch rusted from disuse. No footprints marred the polished floor, and the ceiling showed no signs of tampering. "A locked room," he said, his voice calm but laced with excitement. "A challenge. Most delightful." Constable Hargreaves, summoned once more, scratched his head. "How'd the killer get in and out? It's unnatural." Poirot smiled faintly. "Non, monsieur. It is clever, but not supernatural." He inspected the door's bolt, noting a faint scratch near the mechanism. His fingers traced the frame, pausing at a small, almost invisible groove in the wood. "Aha!" he whispered, producing a magnifying glass from his pocket. The groove revealed traces of waxed thread, barely discernible. "A trick, mes amis," he said, turning to the group. "The killer used a thread to pull the bolt from outside, then removed it through this groove." The guests gasped, but Poirot's focus remained on the room. He searched Crane's belongings, finding a notebook filled with medical notes and a cryptic entry. "Must warn C.B. about the Grove. It's tied to M.A." Poirot's pulse quickened. C.B. Clara Beaumont. M.A. Margaret Ashby. Crane had known something, perhaps enough to make him a target. But what? Poirot pocketed the notebook, his mind racing. The dagger, the thread, the locked room, all suggested a killer with both cunning and access to the manor's secrets. He questioned the guests, their alibis thin under scrutiny. Mrs. Holt claimed she'd been in her room, reading by candlelight, but her trembling hands betrayed her. Langley admitted to pacing the halls, unable to sleep, though he swore he'd seen no one. Lady Eleanor, her composure icy, said she'd been in the drawing-room alone. Ashby, visibly shaken, insisted he'd been in his study, reviewing accounts. Poirot noted their reactions, sensing fear and perhaps guilt beneath their words. Quelque ment, he thought. Someone was lying. Returning to the room, Poirot examined the candle. Its wax pooled unevenly. A faint mark on the bedside table caught his eye. A circular imprint, as though a small object had been removed. "Interessant," he murmured. He recalled Crane's nervous habit of adjusting his spectacles. Perhaps he'd been holding something else, something the killer took. A search of the room revealed a hidden panel behind a painting, but it was empty, its contents, if any, long gone. The whispers of the woods filtered through the window, their cadence almost mocking. Poirot stepped outside to clear his mind, the fog curling around his ankles. The murders of Clara and Crane were linked, not only by their brutality, but by their connection to Margaret Ashby's disappearance. The spiral symbol, the locket, and, now, Crane's note pointed to a vendetta, one that the killer was executing with chilling precision. But how had Crane known of Clara's danger? And why the locked room? Poirot returned to the manor, summoning Ashby to the library. "Lord Ashby," he said, his tone measured, "this dagger, does it belong to your family?" Ashby's face paled. It resembles one from the manor's collection, kept in the armoury." Poirot nodded. The killer was intimate with Blackthorn Manor, perhaps a resident or someone with deep ties to its past. He dismissed Ashby, his mind turning to the guests. Langley's nervousness, Eleanor's secrecy, Holt's theatrics. Each was a suspect, each a piece in the puzzle. As night fell, the manor seemed to close in, its shadows longer, its silence heavier. Poirot sat in his room, the locket, notebook, and hairpin before him. The locked room was no longer a mystery. The waxed thread explained the bolt. But the killer's motive remained elusive. "The past is speaking," Poirot said to the empty room, "but it whispers in riddles." The whispering woods seemed to answer, their murmurs a challenge. With 2 murders and a trail of clues, Poirot knew the killer would strike again, unless he could unravel the truth first. Chapter 6. Secrets in the Family Vault. The air in Blackthorn Manor seemed to thicken with each passing hour, as though the walls themselves absorbed the weight of 2 murders. Hercule Poirot, his green eyes sharp despite the late morning gloom, stood in the grand foyer, his mind a whirl of clues. Clara Beaumont's body in the grove, Dr. Crane's locked room, death, the carved spiral, the missing brooch, the rusted locket, and Crane's cryptic note linking Clara to Margaret Ashby. The whispering woods murmured beyond the windows, their ceaseless whispers a reminder of the secrets they guarded. Poirot's little grey cells demanded he probe deeper into the manor's past, and he knew where to look. The Ashby family vault, rumoured to lie beneath the estate. He approached Grayson, the butler, whose gaunt face seemed paler since Crane's. "It her death." "Monsieur Grayson," Poirot said, his tone polite but firm, "I wish to see the family vault. It is, I believe, beneath the manor." Grayson hesitated, his eyes flickering toward the staircase. "It's not often visited, sir. Lord Ashby may object." Poirot's smile was disarming. Eh bien, I shall persuade him. The truth, it waits for no one. After a brief, tense exchange with Lord Ashby, who reluctantly provided a key, Poirot descended a narrow stone staircase behind a concealed panel in the library, Grayson trailing with a lantern. The vault was a cavernous chamber, its walls damp and moss-streaked, the air heavy with the scent of earth and decay. Stone sarcophagi lined the walls, each bearing the Ashby crest. The lantern's light cast eerie shadows, and the whispers of the woods, though muffled, seemed to echo faintly in the stone. Poirot's cane tapped the floor as he examined the chamber, his senses alert. A place of secrets, he murmured, noting an alcove partially hidden by a faded tapestry. Behind it he found a small iron chest, its lock rusted but intact. With a deft twist of his lock-picking skills, honed from years of necessity, Poirot opened the chest. Inside were brittle letters, a faded photograph, and a silver locket, its surface engraved with an intricate spiral, eerily similar to the carving on the grove's oak. The photograph showed a young Margaret Ashby, her face radiant beside a man Poirot presumed was Elias Crowe, the groundskeeper. The locket, when opened, revealed a miniature portrait of the same man and a lock of dark hair. The letters penned by Margaret spoke of her fear of discovery and a plan to flee with Elias. One line chilled Poirot. "My brother knows, and he will stop at nothing to keep us apart." Poirot's mind raced. Margaret's brother, Lord Ashby's father, had been a key figure in her disappearance. Was the killer avenging her fate, targeting those connected to the Ashby legacy? The spiral symbol linked the vault's locket to Clara's murder, suggesting a deliberate pattern. But how had Dr. Crane fit into this vendetta? His note must warn C.B. about the Grove. It's tied to M.A., indicated knowledge of the connection, making him a threat to the killer. Returning to the Manor's drawing room, Poirot confronted Lady Eleanor, whose guarded demeanour had drawn his suspicion. She sat by the fireplace, her fingers tracing the edge of a teacup. "Lady Eleanor," he began, holding up the locket, "this was found in your family's vault. It belonged to Margaret Ashby, no?" Eleanor's composure faltered, her eyes narrowing. "What of it?" she replied. "Margaret was a fool who brought shame to our name." Poirot leaned forward. "Perhaps, but someone believes her fate was unjust, and they kill to prove it." Eleanor's hand trembled, spilling tea, but she quickly recovered, dismissing him with a wave. Poirot next sought Mrs. Holt, whose theatrical grief seemed calculated. He found her in the conservatory, rearranging flowers with exaggerated care. "Madame Holt," he said, "you spoke of the wood's memory. Did you know of Margaret Ashby's story?" Her eyes widened, but she laughed lightly. "Only village gossip, monsieur. Tragic, but hardly my concern." Poirot noted her evasion, suspecting she knew more than she admitted. Langley, pacing the hallway, was equally evasive, claiming ignorance of the Manor's history, but sweating profusely when pressed about his connection to Clara. As evening approached, Poirot revisited the vault's contents in his room, spreading the letters and locket before him. The spiral symbol was no coincidence. It was a signature, a mark of intent. He recalled Crane's locked room, the waxed thread and the missing object from the bedside table. The killer was meticulous, using the Manor's secrets to their advantage. Was the locket in the vault a clue left for him to find, Or had the garde du jour killer overlooked it? The photograph of Elias suggested a man wronged, perhaps a relative seeking retribution decades later. The whispers of the woods grew louder as night fell, their cadence almost taunting. Poirot stepped onto his balcony, gazing into the fog-laden trees. A flicker of movement caught his eye, a shadow darting near the grove. He considered investigating, but deemed it unwise without preparation. Instead, he returned to his notes, sketching the spiral symbol. "The past is a map," he said softly, "and I must follow its paths." The manor was restless, the guests' fear palpable. Ashby had doubled the servants' patrols, but Poirot sensed the killer was among them, watching, waiting. The locket, the letters, and Crane's note pointed to a motive rooted in betrayal, but the killer's identity remained elusive. Was it Eleanor, hiding family shame? Langley, with his nervous glances? Or Holt, with her cryptic remarks? Poirot's resolve hardened. "The truth hides in the shadows," he whispered, "but Hercule Poirot sees all." As he prepared for bed, a faint knock came at his door. A folded note slid beneath it, the same cream-coloured paper as his invitation. In bold script, it read, "The vault holds more than relics. Dig deeper, or join them." Poirot's lips curved into a determined smile. The killer was bold, but so was he. The whispering woods might whisper their secrets, but Hercule Poirot would make them sing. Chapter 7. The Midnight Masquerade. The chandeliers of Blackthorn Manor's ballroom glittered like stars, their light fractured by the swirling masks of the guests at Lord Ashby's masquerade ball. Hercule Poirot, resplendent in a black domino mask and his impeccably tailored suit, stood at the edge of the room, his green eyes scanning the crowd. The murders of Clara Beaumont and Dr. Crane had cast a shadow over the manor, yet Ashby insisted on the ball, claiming it was a tradition to honour his late father's memory. Poirot suspected another motive, to distract from the growing fear, or to lure the killer into a misstep. The whispers of the whispering woods filtered through the open terrace doors, a haunting undertone to the music of the string quartet. Poirot's little grey cells were alight with the clues accumulated. The silver hairpin, the spiral symbol, the rusted locket from the vault, Margaret Ashby's letters, Crane's note, and the latest warning slipped under his door. The vault holds more than relics. Dig deeper or join them. The masquerade, with its anonymity, was the perfect stage for secrets to slip. He adjusted his mask, blending into the crowd, his cane a silent extension of his vigilance. The guests moved like pieces on a chessboard. Lord Ashby, masked as a Venetian noble, mingled with forced joviality. Lady Eleanor, her face hidden by a silver filigree mask, glided through the room, her posture rigid. Mrs. Lavinia Holt, in a dramatic peacock feather mask, held court near, the punch bowl, her laughter shrill. Victor Langley, his bear-like mask ill-fitting, hovered near the terrace, his eyes darting nervously. Poirot noted their positions, their glances, their hesitations. In a masquerade, he mused, the mask hides the face, but the eyes betray the soul. He approached Mrs. Holt, engaging her in light banter. "Madame, your mask is most striking," he said, his tone charming. "Does it reflect the mysteries you keep?" She laughed, but her eyes flickered. "Oh, Monsieur Poirot, I'm an open book. But these woods, they do make one wonder about old grudges." Her words were vague, yet Poirot caught a hint of knowledge. He pressed gently, asking about Margaret Ashby, but she deflected, gesturing. "To the dancers. Such a lively night. Let's not dwell on ghosts." Moving through the crowd, Poirot overheard a heated exchange near a shadowed alcove. Langley's voice, low but tense, reached him. "You knew her plans, Eleanor. Don't pretend otherwise." Lady Eleanor's reply was sharp. "Keep your voice down, Victor. You've no right to accuse me." Poirot edged closer, hidden by a pillar. Langley muttered something about debts unpaid, but a passing couple drowned out the rest. Poirot filed the conversation away, suspecting a link to Clara's business dealings with Langley, or perhaps to Margaret's betrayal. The music swelled, and the dancers spun faster, their masks creating a kaleidoscope of colour and deception. Poirot, ever observant, noticed a figure in a hooded black mask lingering near the terrace doors. Their posture was unfamiliar, their movements deliberate. As Poirot approached, the figure turned, their eyes glinting through the mask's slits. "Monsieur Poirot," they whispered, their voice distorted, neither male nor female. "You dig too deep. Leave the woods, or the whispers will claim you." Before Poirot could respond, the figure slipped onto the terrace, vanishing into the fog. Poirot's pulse quickened, but he remained composed. "A bold move," he thought, stepping onto the terrace. The air was cold, the whispers of the woods louder now, almost forming words. He scanned the darkness but found no trace of the masked figure. Returning to the ballroom, he sought Ashby, who was deep in conversation with a servant. "Lord Ashby," Poirot said, "who among your guests wears a hooded black mask?" Ashby frowned. "No one, to my knowledge. The costumes were planned." Poirot's suspicion deepened. An uninvited guest, perhaps the killer themselves. As midnight approached, the ball reached its peak, the guests' laughter tinged with unease. Poirot positioned himself near the grand staircase, watching for anomalies. Suddenly, a gasp rippled through the crowd. Mrs. Holt staggered from the dance floor, clutching her throat, her peacock mask askew. "Poison!" she gasped, collapsing into Langley's arms. Chaos erupted, guests shouting, servants rushing forward. Poirot pushed through, his voice cutting through the din. "Calmez-vous! Fetch water and a doctor." Dr. Crane was gone, but a local physician, summoned earlier for Clara's inquest, was present. He examined Mrs. Holt, who was pale but breathing. "Not poison," he declared after a tense moment. "A reaction, perhaps, to the punch. She'll recover." Poirot's eyes narrowed, inspecting the glass Mrs. Holt had dropped. A faint residue clung to its rim, odourless but suspicious. Each pocketed a sample, suspecting an attempt to silence her or to create a distraction. The ball ended abruptly, the guests retreating to their rooms, their masks no longer hiding their fear. Poirot lingered, questioning the servants about the punch. None admitted to tampering, but a young maid, trembling, mentioned seeing a gloved hand near the bowl before Mrs. Holt's collapse. "Intéressant," Poirot murmured, recalling the masked figure's warning. The killer was growing reckless, their threats bolder. In his room, Poirot reviewed the night's events. The overheard argument between Langley and Eleanor suggested a shared secret, possibly tied to Clara's murder. The hooded figure's warning echoed the note under his door, confirming the killer's awareness of his progress. Mrs. Holt's collapse, though not fatal, was no accident. The spiral locket, the vault's letters, and Crane's note all pointed to a vendetta rooted in Margaret Ashby's fate. But the killer's identity remained a shadow behind a mask. As the manor fell silent, the whispers of the woods grew insistent, curling through the night. Poirot stood at his window, the residue from the glass safe in his pocket. "You challenge me," he said to the darkness, "but Hercule Poirot does not yield." Think! The masquerade had revealed more than faces. It had exposed alliances, fears, and a killer's desperation. Tomorrow he would tighten the net, but tonight the whispering woods held their secrets close, daring him to unravel them. Chapter 8. Footprints in the Mist. The first light of dawn barely pierced the fog that cloaked the whispering woods, its tendrils weaving through the ancient trees like spectral fingers. Hercule Poirot, clad in a heavy overcoat and clutching his cane, stepped out from Blackthorn Manor, his breath visible in the chill air. The masquerade ball's chaos, Mrs. Holt's collapse, the hooded figure's warning, and the overheard argument between Langley and Lady Eleanor had sharpened his resolve. The residue from Mrs. Holt's glass, the spiral locket, and the cryptic notes all pointed to a killer steeped in the manor's past. The whispers of the woods, ever present, seemed to beckon him forward, and Poirot, never one to ignore a challenge, ventured into their depths. He had risen before the household, driven by a hunch that the grove where Clara Beaumont was found held more secrets. The warning from the masked figure, "Leave the woods, or the whispers will claim you," only fueled his determination. As he navigated the twisting paths, the fog muffled his footsteps, and the whispers grew louder, a sibilant chorus that seemed to pulse with intent. Poirot's green eyes scanned the ground, and near the grove he spotted faint footprints in the damp earth, too faint to belong to the heavy boots of the servants or Constable Hargreaves. They led away from the manor, toward a part of the woods he had not yet explored. Following the trail, Poirot moved with care, his cane probing the ground for hidden obstacles. The footprints, small and deliberate, suggested someone light-footed, perhaps a woman, or a man skilled in stealth. The path wound deeper into the woods, where the trees grew denser, their branches forming a canopy that blocked the rising sun. The whispers seemed to follow him, now soft, now sharp, as though the woods themselves were watching. "Mon Dieu," he murmured, "you test my patience, but Hercule Poirot is not so easily deterred." The trail ended at a crumbling stone structure, an abandoned chapel, its spire broken and its windows long shattered. Ivy clung to its walls, and the door hung ajar, creaking in the breeze. Poirot stepped inside, the air thick with the scent of mould and neglect. The chapel's interior was sparse, a cracked altar, scattered pews, and a faded fresco of an angel, its eyes seeming to follow him. On the altar he found fresh signs of activity, candle wax drippings, still soft, and a blood-stained cloth tucked beneath a loose stone. "Aha!" he said, lifting the cloth with his handkerchief. The blood was recent, likely from the night of Clara's murder, or Crane's. Searching further, Poirot discovered a hidden compartment in the altar, revealed by a loose panel. Inside, was a small leather book, its pages filled with cryptic symbols and names. One page listed initials, CB, MC, and others, alongside the spiral symbol he'd seen on the Grove's oak and the vault's locket. Another entry mentioned a Circle of the Whisper, a name that sent a chill through him. Was this a secret society tied to Margaret Ashby's disappearance and the current murders? The book's final page held a chilling phrase: "The debt of blood is paid in blood." Poirot pocketed the book, his mind racing. The Circle of the Whisper suggested a group with a vendetta, perhaps descendants of those wronged by the Ashbys. Clara's business dealings with Langley, Crane's warning note, and the spiral symbol all pointed to a conspiracy rooted in the past. The blood-stained cloth suggested the chapel was a meeting place, perhaps where the killer planned their moves. But whose blood was it? Clara's? Crane's? Or another victim yet to be discovered? As he exited the chapel, the fog thickened, and the whispers seemed to close in. A snap of a twig startled him, and he turned, his cane raised. Nothing but shadows met his gaze, yet he felt watched. "Montrez-vous," he called softly, but only the whispers answered. He retraced his steps to the manor, the book and cloth safe in his coat. The footprints he'd followed had vanished in the mist, as though the woods themselves conspired to hide them. Back at Blackthorn Manor, the guests were subdued, gathered in the drawing-room under Constable Hargreaves' watchful eye. Poirot observed them closely. Mrs. Holt, recovered but pale, clutched a shawl, her eyes darting nervously. Langley paced, muttering about leaving, while Lady Eleanor sat rigid, her gaze fixed on the fire. Lord Ashby, haggard, tried to maintain order, but his authority was fraying. Poirot chose not to reveal his findings yet, instead probing their reactions. "Mes amis," he said, "the woods hold secrets, but so do you. Who among you knows of the Circle of the Whisper?" The room tensed. Eleanor's eyes flicked to him, then away. Langley stopped pacing, his face ashen. Mrs. Holt gasped, then covered it with a cough. Ashby frowned. "Nonsense, Poirot. That's a village myth, nothing more." But his voice lacked conviction. Poirot smiled thinly. "Perhaps, but myths, like murders, have roots in truth." He excused himself, noting their unease. Someone in this room knew of the circle, and their silence was a clue in itself. In his room, Poirot examined the leather book, its symbols taunting him. The initials CB and MC, Clara and Crane, suggested they were targets, but why? Their connection to Margaret Ashby's tragedy was unclear, but the blood-stained cloth hinted at more violence to come. The whispers outside his window grew louder, almost forming words. Poirot stood, his resolve unshaken. "You whisper your threats," he said to the night, "but Hercule Poirot hears all." The chapel's evidence had tightened the net, but the killer was still a shadow in the fog. With the Circle of the Whisper now in play, Poirot knew the stakes were higher. The woods were watching, and the killer was close, perhaps closer than he realized. Tomorrow he would confront the guests with his findings, forcing the truth into the light. For now, the Whispering Woods held their secrets, but Poirot was determined to make them yield. Chapter 9. The Alibi That Wasn't. The gloom of Blackthorn Manor seemed to deepen with each passing day. The weight of 2 murders, Clara Beaumont in the Grove and Dr. Crane in the locked room, pressing on its ancient walls. Hercule Poirot sat in the library, the leather book from the chapel open before him, its cryptic symbols and the phrase, "The debt of blood is paid in blood," etched in his mind. The whispering woods murmured beyond the windows, their whispers a constant reminder of the secrets they guarded. The spiral locket, the blood-stained cloth, and the circle of the whisper pointed to a vendetta tied to Margaret Ashby's disappearance. But the killer's identity remained elusive. Poirot's little grey cells demanded clarity, and he resolved to test the guests' alibis, sensing a lie at the heart of the mystery. He gathered the remaining guests, Lord Ashby, Lady Eleanor, Victor Langley, and Mrs. Lavinia Holt, in the drawing-room, their faces drawn under the flickering chandelier. Constable Hargreaves stood by the door, his notebook ready, while Grayson hovered, his gaunt frame a silent sentinel. Poirot's presence commanded attention, his green eyes piercing as he began. "Mes amis," he said, his voice steady, "2 murders have stained this manor, and the truth lies in your words. I ask again, where were you at midnight when Mademoiselle Beaumont met her fate, and at 2 in the morning when Dr. Crane was killed?" Lord Ashby, his jaw tight, repeated his alibi. He'd been in his study, reviewing accounts during both murders. Poirot noted the sweat on his brow, despite the room's chill. Mrs. Holt, her peacock feather fan trembling, claimed she'd been in the library reading at midnight and in her room at 2, recovering from her collapse at the masquerade. Langley, his bear-like frame shifting uncomfortably, insisted he'd been in the garden at midnight and asleep by 2. Lady Eleanor, her silver-grey eyes cold, said she'd been writing letters in her room for both times. Poirot's smile was polite but sharp. "Très bien, but alibi, they must withstand scrutiny." He turned to Langley, whose nervous pacing at the ball had caught his eye. "Monsieur Langley, you walked the garden at midnight, oui? Yet the maid saw you near the east wing, where Mademoiselle Beaumont's hairpin was found." Langley's face reddened. I wandered near there, yes, but only briefly. I saw nothing." Poirot pressed, his voice soft but relentless. "And your argument with Lady Eleanor at the ball? Debts unpaid, you said. What debts?" Langley stammered. "Business matters, nothing more. Clara owed me money." Poirot's eyes narrowed. Langley's evasions were crumbling. Next, Poirot faced Mrs. Holt. "Madame, you were in the library at midnight, yet the servants found it empty, and the residue in your glass at the ball, not an accident, I think." Mrs. Holt's fan snapped. "Shut! How dare you? I was ill, not poisoned." But her eyes darted to Eleanor, a flicker of fear betraying her. Poirot filed this away, turning to Eleanor. "Lady Eleanor, your letters, may I see them?" Her lips thinned. "They're private, monsieur." Poirot nodded, undeterred. "Privacy hides many things, including guilt." As the interrogations continued, a soft knock interrupted. A young maid, Elsie, entered, her face pale. "Begging your pardon, sir," she said to Poirot, "but I saw something the night Miss Beaumont died." The room tensed, Ashby's knuckles whitening. Elsie, trembling, recounted seeing a figure in a dark cloak near the grove at midnight, moving swiftly toward the manor. "I thought it was a guest, but they wore a hood, like at the ball." Poirot's pulse quickened. The hooded figure from the masquerade. Could it be the same? "Did you see their face?" he asked. Elsie shook her head. No, sir, but they dropped something, a small vial, glass-like, near the path. Poirot dispatched Hargreaves to search the path, his mind racing. A vial suggested poison, perhaps linked to Mrs. Holt's collapse or Crane's murder. He questioned Elsie further, learning she'd kept silent out of fear, only coming forward after overhearing Poirot's reputation. Merci, mademoiselle, he said, dismissing her gently. The guests exchanged uneasy glances, their alibis now suspect. Langley's presence near the east wing, Holt's empty library, and Eleanor's refusal to show her letters pointed to deception. But whose? Poirot revisited Crane's notebook, found in the locked room. Its entry. Must warn C.B. about the Grove. It's tied to M.A., suggesting Crane knew of a threat tied to Margaret Ashby. The leather book from the chapel, with its list of initials and the circle of the whisper, hinted at a group orchestrating the murders. Was the cloaked figure a member, or the killer themselves? The vial, if found, could confirm poison, linking the crimes further. As the guests dispersed, Poirot lingered, his gaze on the whispering woods. The fog had lifted, but the whispers remained, a taunting chorus. He recalled the blood-stained cloth from the chapel, the spiral locket, and the note under his door. Dig deeper, or join them. The killer was watching, their moves calculated but growing desperate. Elsie's testimony had shifted suspicion, but Poirot sensed the truth was still veiled. In his room, he sketched a timeline. Clara's death at midnight, Crane's at 2, the cloaked figure at midnight, and the vial. Langley's lie about the garden, Eleanor's secrecy, and Holt's. Fear suggested they knew more than they admitted. The circle of the whisper loomed large, its purpose unclear but deadly. The alibi that wasn't, Poirot murmured, is the key to the truth. The woods whispered back, their secrets close but elusive. Poirot straightened his tie, his resolve unshaken. The killer was near, and with Elsie's clue, he was one step closer to unmasking them. Chapter 10. The Whispering Tree. The whispering woods seemed to hold their breath as Hercule Poirot ventured into their depths, the late afternoon, light filtering through the gnarled branches in fractured slivers. The murders of Clara Beaumont and Dr. Crane, the cryptic clues, spiral locket, blood-stained cloth, leather book, and the vial mentioned by the maid Elsie, had woven a tapestry of deceit that Poirot was determined to unravel. The latest revelation, a local legend about a whispering tree tied to the wood's curse, had drawn him here, spurred by Elsie's mention of a cloaked figure and the circle of the whisper. The wood's murmurs grew louder, almost forming words, as if daring him to uncover their secrets. Poirot's cane sank into the mossy earth as he followed a path described by Thomas, the footman, who had spoken of the tree with hushed reverence. "It's an old oak, sir," Thomas had said, "marked by carvings. Folks say it speaks the truth to those who listen." Poirot, ever the rationalist, dismissed superstition, but recognized the tree's potential as a focal point for the killer's ritualistic acts. The spiral symbol on the grove's oak and the vault's locket suggested a pattern, and he suspected the whispering tree held the next clue. The path led to a clearing where a massive oak stood, its trunk twisted and scarred, its branches clawing at the sky like skeletal hands. Carvings covered its bark, spirals, runes, and cryptic shapes, some fresh, others weathered by time. The whispers here were deafening, a chorus that seemed to emanate from the tree itself. Poirot's green eyes gleamed as he examined the carvings, noting a sequence of symbols that repeated, a spiral, a crescent, and a dagger. "Mon Dieu," he murmured, "a code hidden in plain sight." Using his magnifying glass, Poirot traced the freshest carving, a spiral identical to those at the crime scenes. Below it, etched faintly, were letters. E.C. to M.A., betrayed. Elias Crowe and Margaret Ashby, he deduced, their love story etched into the tree as a testament to their doom. He sketched the symbols in his notebook, his little grey cells piecing together the code. The crescent matched Clara's missing brooch, the dagger Crane's murder weapon. The sequence suggested a narrative of betrayal, reenacted through the murders. But who was the avenger? A deeper inspection revealed a hollow in the tree's roots, concealed by moss. Inside, Poirot found a small wax-sealed parchment. Unfolding it, he read a coded message. "The circle strikes at dusk. Third debt falls. Tonight." The handwriting matched the threatening notes he'd received, confirming the killer's intent to strike again. The Circle of the Whisper, it seemed, was not merely a myth, but a group, or a single fanatic, executing a vendetta. Poirot pocketed the parchment, his resolve hardening. "The third debt," he whispered. "I must act swiftly." As he prepared to leave, a rustle in the underbrush startled him. He turned, cane raised, to see Victor Langley emerge, his face flushed and his coat smeared with mud. "Monsieur Poirot," Langley exclaimed, his voice unsteady. I was just walking. What are you doing here?" Poirot's eyes narrowed. "A curious place for a stroll, monsieur. Why do you follow me?" Langley's hands trembled. "I wasn't. I needed air. This place is cursed." His panic seemed genuine, but Poirot sensed deception. Before Poirot could press further, Langley bolted, crashing through the woods toward the manor. Poirot gave chase, his agility surprising for his stature. The fog thickened, the whispers urging him on. He caught Langley near the grove, tackling him to the ground. "Assez!" Poirot barked. "You run from the truth, monsieur. What do you know of the circle?" Langley struggled, his eyes wild. "Nothing. I swear. Clara owed me money. That's all. I didn't kill her." Poirot held him firm, noting a spiral-shaped cufflink on Langley's sleeve, a match for the symbol. "We shall see," he said, releasing him but memorizing the cufflink's design. Returning to the manor, Poirot summoned Constable Hargreaves and the guests to the drawing-room. Langley, dishevelled, avoided his gaze. Lady Eleanor's composure was strained, Mrs. Holt's theatrics subdued. Lord Ashby, haggard, demanded answers. Poirot held up the parchment, his voice commanding. "Mes amis, the killer plans a third murder tonight, guided by the Circle of the Whisper. Monsieur Langley, your cufflink bears their mark. Explain." Langley paled, stammering, "It's just jewellery. I bought it in London." But his fear betrayed him. Poirot turned to Eleanor. "And you, Lady Eleanor, spoke of debts unpaid with Monsieur Langley. Are these the debts of the Circle?" Eleanor's lips tightened. "You overstep, monsieur." Mrs. Holt, trembling, interjected. "I told you, the woods remember." "Wrongs." Poirot silenced her with a glance, his mind racing. The cufflink, the parchment, and Langley's flight suggested he was involved. But was he the killer, or a pawn? As dusk approached, Poirot requested Hargreaves increase the Manor's patrols. In his room, he studied the parchment's code, cross-referencing it with the leather book's symbols. The third debt hinted at another target, perhaps Eleanor, Holt, or Ashby. The Circle's vendetta, tied to Margaret and Elias, was clear, but the killer's identity remained shadowed. The whispers outside grew insistent, almost chanting. Poirot stood, his resolve unshaken. "You strike at dusk," he said to the night, "but Hercule Poirot is ready." The confrontation with Langley had exposed a crack in the killer's facade, and the Whispering Tree's message was a call to action. The woods watched, their secrets teetering on the edge of revelation. Poirot knew the next hours would be critical. Either he would stop the killer, or the Whispering Woods would claim another victim. Chapter 11. The Final Guest. The air in Blackthorn Manor crackled with dread as dusk settled over the Whispering Woods, their relentless murmurs seeping through the walls. Like a warning, Hercule Poirot stood in his room, the clues spread before him. The spiral locket, the blood-stained cloth, the leather book with the circle of the Whisper's symbols, the coded parchment from the Whispering Tree proclaiming a third debt, to be paid tonight. The murders of Clara Beaumont and Dr. Crane, tied to Margaret Ashby's disappearance, pointed to a vendetta orchestrated by a cunning killer. Victor Langley's spiral cufflink and his flight from the woods had marked him as a suspect. But Poirot's little grey cells sensed the truth was deeper, woven into the Manor's shadowed history. A scream shattered the silence, echoing from the west wing. Poirot, his cane in hand, hurried toward the sound, joined by Constable Hargreaves and a frantic Grayson. In a guest room, they found Mrs. Lavinia Holt crumpled on the floor, her peacock feather fan clutched in her hand, a thin wire looped around her neck. Her eyes, wide with terror, stared blankly, and a fresh spiral was carved into the wooden bedpost. "Mon Dieu," Poirot murmured, kneeling beside her. The wire, taut and precise, suggested a swift, silent kill. The killer had struck at dusk, as the parchment foretold. Hargreaves, shaken, muttered, "3 murders now! This place is cursed!" Poirot's gaze was steely. "Non, monsieur, not cursed, calculated." He examined the room, noting an open window and a faint smudge of mud on the sill. The wire, an unusual weapon, matched the precision of Crane's dagger and Clara's wound. A search of Mrs. Holt's belongings revealed a letter, half-written, addressed to a solicitor. "I know the truth about the Ashby scandal. If I don't return, seek the circle." Poirot pocketed it, his mind racing. Mrs. Holt, like Crane, had known too much. He summoned the remaining guests, Lord Ashby, Lady Eleanor, and Victor Langley, to the drawing-room, their faces pale under the chandelier's flickering light. The servants, under Hargreaves' orders, guarded the exits, but the manor felt like a trap closing in. Poirot stood before the fireplace, his voice commanding. "Mes amis," he began, "3 lives have been taken. Clara Beaumont, Dr. Crane, and now Madame Holt. Each was marked by the spiral, the sign of the circle of the whisper. Each was a debt, paid in blood, tied to Margaret Ashby's fate." He held up the leather book, its pages open to the list of initials. CBMCLH, Clara, Crane, Holt. They were targeted, but why? Clara's brooch, Crane's note, Holt's letter, all point to a secret they uncovered. He turned to Ashby, whose hands trembled. Lord Ashby, your family's past holds the key. Margaret Ashby's disappearance was no accident. Her brother, your father, prevented her elopement with Elias Crowe. Did he go further? Did he ensure her silence? Ashby's face drained of colour. How dare you? My father was a good man. Poirot's eyes flicked to Eleanor. And you, Lady Eleanor, knew of this scandal. Your argument with Monsieur Langley, debts unpaid, suggests a shared guilt. Did you protect the family's honour at all costs? Eleanor's lips tightened, but she remained silent. Langley, sweating, protested. I told you it was business with Clara. Nothing to do with this. Poirot's smile was sharp. Yet your cufflink bears the spiral, monsieur. A coincidence? I think not. He produced the parchment from the whispering tree. The killer warned of a third debt, and it has been paid. But there is more. Madame Holt's letter speaks of an Ashby scandal, one the Circle seeks to avenge. He paused, letting the tension build. I have uncovered a truth. Your father, Lord Ashby, did not merely drive Elias Crowe away. Documents in the vault suggest he paid men to ensure Margaret never returned. Her death was concealed, her lover framed. Ashby staggered, gripping a chair. Lies! You have no proof! Poirot held up Margaret's final letter. Its words, damning. My brother will stop at nothing. The room erupted in accusations, Langley pointing at Eleanor, Eleanor glaring at Ashby. Poirot raised a hand, silencing them. The Circle of the Whisper, he said, is no myth. It is a reckoning, led by one among us, or near us. The spiral is their mark, the woods their witness. Before he could continue, the chandelier flickered, then plunged the room into darkness. A collective gasp rose, followed by a crash of glass from the terrace doors. Restez calme, Poirot shouted, but chaos ensued. Footsteps, a muffled cry, and the sound of someone fleeing. Hargreaves lit a lantern, revealing the room in disarray. A chair overturned, a window shattered, and Langley gone. He's run! Ashby cried. Poirot's eyes narrowed. Or he was taken! He stepped to the terrace, the whispers of the woods deafening now, almost taunting. Muddy footprints led into the fog, mirroring those he'd seen at dawn. The killer, or Langley, had fled. But why now? Had Poirot's revelation struck too close? In the flickering light, Poirot gathered his thoughts. The murders were a vendetta, the Circle avenging Margaret's murder. Holt's letter, like Crane's note, suggested she'd uncovered the truth, making her a target. Langley's flight, or abduction, hinted at his role. But was he killer or victim? The power outage was no accident. It was a move to disrupt Poirot's momentum. The net tightens, he whispered, but the prey is cunning. The manor was locked down, but the woods beckoned, their whispers a challenge. Poirot knew the killer was close, their plan unraveling under his scrutiny. With Ashby's secret exposed and Langley missing, the final act loomed. The truth waits, Poirot said, his resolve unshaken, and Hercule Poirot will find it. The darkness of the whispering woods seemed to answer, their secrets poised to break free. Chapter 12. The killer's confession. The whispering woods pulsed with an almost palpable malice as Hercule Poirot stood at their edge, the fog swirling like a living thing under the pale moonlight. The chaos of Blackthorn Manor's drawing room, Mrs. Holt's murder, the shattered window, and Victor Langley's disappearance had propelled the mystery to its breaking point. The spiral locket, the blood-stained cloth, the circle of the Whisper's leather book, and the coded parchment from the Whispering Tree, all pointed to a vendetta avenging Margaret Ashby's murder. Poirot's little grey cells had pieced together the puzzle, and he knew the killer was cornered. Tonight, in the heart of the woods, he would end their deadly game. Poirot had devised a ruse, whispering to Constable Hargreaves and Grayson that he'd found a hidden journal in the vault, one naming the killer. He let the rumour spread among the servants, knowing it would reach the culprit. With Lord Ashby and Lady Eleanor confined to the manor under guard, and Langley still missing, Poirot ventured to the grove where Clara Beaumont had died, the spiral-carved oak a silent witness. He carried a lantern, its light casting eerie shadows, and a forged letter, crafted to mimic Margaret's hand, claiming Elias Crow's descendant sought revenge. "The bait is set," he murmured, placing the letter near the tree where the whispers seemed to chant. He concealed himself behind a cluster of yews, his cane ready, his senses sharp. The woods were alive, their murmurs rising to a crescendo, as if anticipating the confrontation. Footsteps crunched on the path, deliberate and stealthy. A figure emerged, cloaked and hooded, their face obscured, the same figure from the masquerade. They knelt by the tree, snatching the letter, their breath hitching as they read it. Poirot stepped forward, his voice cutting through the whispers. "Assez, Madame Holt, or should I say, the one who pretends to be her?" The figure froze, then tore off the hood, revealing not Mrs. Holt, but Lady Eleanor Ashby, her silver-grey eyes blazing with fury. "You're clever, Poirot," she hissed, "but too late." Poirot's smile was calm. "Non, madame, it is you who are late. The real Madame Holt lies dead, but you, her sister, masquerading as her after her murder, have played your part too long." Eleanor's hand darted to her cloak, but Poirot raised his cane, its hidden blade glinting. "Do not try," he warned. "Hargreaves waits nearby." Eleanor's composure cracked, her voice trembling. "You can't prove it." Poirot's eyes gleamed. "Oh, but I can. The spiral cufflink I attributed to Langley was yours, dropped in the chapel. The vial Elsie saw, your poison, meant for Holt, but used to silence her permanently. The waxed thread in Crane's room, the wire around Holt's neck, all bear your precision. You are the circle of the Whisper, avenging Margaret Ashby, your aunt, whom your father murdered." Eleanor's laugh was bitter. He didn't just murder her. He buried her in these woods unmarked to save the family's honour. I found her, Locket as a child, learned the truth, and swore to make them pay. Poirot nodded, his voice soft but relentless. "Clara Beaumont uncovered your family's secret through her business with Langley, who knew of your father's dealings. Crane pieced it together, warning Clara. Holt, your sister, grew suspicious, so you killed her, assuming her identity to deflect blame. The spirals were your signature, a tribute to Margaret's pain." Eleanor's eyes filled with tears, but her voice was defiant. "They deserved it. Clara, Crane, even Langley. He was next, hiding in the woods, too weak to face me. Poirot stepped closer, his lantern illuminating her face. And the notes to me? You taunted me, madam, believing I would fail. Eleanor sneered. You're just a man, Poirot. The woods are my ally. As she spoke, the whispers surged, almost drowning her words. Poirot's gaze never wavered. The woods whisper, but they do not kill. You did with a plan both brilliant and flawed. Why else forge Holt's letter to a solicitor, planting false clues? Before Eleanor could respond, Hargreaves and Grayson emerged, lanterns blazing. It's over, Lady Eleanor, Hargreaves said, cuffs ready. Eleanor lunged, a dagger flashing, but Poirot sidestepped, tripping her with his cane. She fell, sobbing, as Hargreaves restrained her. Margaret deserved justice, she cried. Poirot's voice was gentle but firm. Justice we, but not murder. You became what you despised. As Eleanor was led away, Poirot lingered in the grove, the whispers softening, as if appeased. He found Langley cowering nearby, unharmed but terrified, confessing his minor role in Clara's financial schemes but denying murder. Poirot believed him. Langley was a coward, not a killer. The forged letter had drawn Eleanor out, her obsession with the Circle's mission, her undoing. The spirals, the locket, the coded messages, all were her tributes to Margaret, twisted by decades of rage. Back at the manor, Poirot explained to a stunned Lord Ashby, who wept for his sister's actions and his father's sins. She hid her pain, Ashby said, but it consumed her? Poirot nodded, his heart heavy. The past poisons, monsieur, unless we let it go. The clues, hairpin, vial, cufflink, and notes, had led him to Eleanor, her psychological unraveling the final piece. The Circle of the Whisper was no society, but one woman's crusade, born of a child's discovery in the woods. As dawn approached, the whispers faded, the woods falling eerily silent. Poirot stood by the grove, the spiral oak now just a tree, its power broken. The truth is found, he said, and the whispers cease. Eleanor's confession had closed the case, but the cost was steep. The whispering woods, though silent, seemed to watch. Their secrets laid bare by Hercule Poirot's unyielding pursuit of justice. Chapter 13. The Silence of the Woods. The dawn broke over Blackthorn Manor with a stillness that felt almost unnatural, as if the whispering woods themselves had exhaled their secrets and fallen silent. Hercule Poirot stood in the grand foyer, his suitcase packed, his patent leather shoes gleaming despite the dust of the past days. The murders of Clara Beaumont, Dr. Crane, and Mrs. Holt had been solved. Their killer, Lady Eleanor Ashby, unmasked, in a moonlit confrontation in the grove. Her confession, a raw outpouring of rage and grief for her Aunt Margaret Ashby's murder, had laid bare the vendetta of the Circle of the Whisper. Yet, as Poirot prepared to leave, the weight of the truth lingered, heavy as the fog that clung to the woods. The manor was subdued, its opulence dimmed by tragedy. Lord Reginald Ashby, broken by his sister's crimes and his father's dark legacy, stood by the fireplace in the drawing-room, staring into the embers. "Monsieur Poirot," he said, his voice hoarse, "how did I not see her pain? Eleanor carried this burden alone." Poirot's green eyes softened, though his posture remained impeccable. Mon ami, the heart hides its wounds, even from those closest. Your sister sought justice, but chose a path of vengeance. It is a lesson in the danger of secrets. Victor Langley, cleared of murder but guilty of shady dealings with Clara, had left at first light, his bluster replaced by shame. The servants, led by Grayson, moved quietly, their faces etched with relief and sorrow. Constable Hargreaves had taken Eleanor into custody, her wrists bound as she was led from the woods, her eyes still burning with defiance. The clues, spiral locket, blood-stained cloth, leather book, coded parchment, and the vial, had all pointed to her, each a thread in the tapestry Poirot had unravelled with his little grey cells. Poirot walked the manor's grounds one last time, drawn to the grove where the spiral-carved oak stood. The whispering woods were silent now, their murmurs gone, as if Margaret's justice, however twisted, had appeased their restless spirits. He touched the tree's bark, the spiral symbol now just a scar. "You spoke, and I listened," he said softly. The locket, found in the vault, rested in his pocket, a memento he would return to Ashby, a reminder of the past's long shadow. In the drawing-room, Poirot addressed the remaining staff and Ashby, tying up loose ends. "Mes amis," he began. The Circle of the Whisper was no society, but one woman's crusade. Eleanor, as a child, found Margaret's locket and learned of her father's crime. She crafted the spiral as her mark, targeting those who uncovered the truth. Clara, through her business with Langley, Crane, who warned her, and Holt, her sister, who grew suspicious. The hairpin, the vial, the waxed thread, all were her tools, wielded with precision. Ashby shook his head. But why impersonate Lavinia? Poirot's smile was faint. To deflect suspicion, monsieur. By becoming her sister, she hid in plain sight. He explained the final ruse. The forged letter at the Whispering Tree, claiming a journal named the killer, had drawn Eleanor out, her obsession betraying her. The power outage, orchestrated by her tampering with the manor's wiring, was meant to cover her escape, but Poirot's trap was tighter. "The truth," he said, "is like a melody. Each note must harmonize. Eleanor's discord was her downfall." Ashby offered thanks, his voice choked. "You've saved us, Poirot, but at what cost?" Poirot's gaze was steady. "Justice, monsieur, is never without cost, but it restores order where chaos reigned." He declined to stay longer, sensing the manor needed time to heal. As he boarded the carriage to Thornwick Station, Grayson handed him a small package, a token from Ashby, containing a silver pen engraved with the manor's crest. "Oh, for your service," Grayson said. Poirot nodded, touched but resolute. The carriage rattled through the whispering woods, the trees looming like silent sentinels. Poirot leaned back, reflecting on the case. Eleanor's vengeance, born of a child's discovery, had twisted her into a mirror of her father's cruelty. The woods, with their whispers, had amplified her obsession, as if feeding on her pain. Yet, Poirot wondered, had they truly fallen silent? A faint hum, barely audible, brushed his ears as the carriage passed the grove. He smiled wryly. "Perhaps you keep one secret still," he said to the woods. At Thornwick Station, the train to London awaited, its whistle cutting through the morning air. Poirot boarded, settling into a compartment, his suitcase at his side. He opened his notebook, reviewing the case. The anonymous invitation, the spiral symbols, the notes taunting him. Each clue had led to Eleanor, but the Woods role lingered in his mind. Were they merely a backdrop or something more? He shook his head, dismissing the thought. Hercule Poirot deals in facts, not fancies, he murmured. Yet the hum persisted, faint as a memory. As the train pulled away, Blackthorn Manor faded into the mist, its turrets swallowed by the trees. The passengers around him chattered, unaware of the drama that had unfolded. Poirot's thoughts turned to justice. Not the vengeful kind Eleanor sought, but the measured truth he delivered. "The little grey cells triumph," he said softly, stroking his moustache. The case was closed, the killer caught, but the whispering woods, in their silence, seemed to whisper one final time. A fleeting, enigmatic sound that followed him into the distance.